Welcome to Witham Sounding Board, a podcast sharing powerful business tips, insights, and trends for those seeking to become a rock star in their industry.
Hello and welcome back to Witham C-Suite podcast series. I'm your host, Cuddy Thomas. I'm part of Witham's outsourced accounting and fractional CFO service line. We support the offices of controllers and CFOs. If you'd like to know more about what we do and how we support our clients, let's go to witham.com/oasis, and that's spelled OASYS. I have the pleasure of welcoming Alexis Becker as our guest today. Alexis is a partner in practice. Prior to Witham, she led the accounting and advisory practice of Fried Maxim, who recently joined their practice with Witham. He has held leadership positions in both public and industry. And my discussion with Alexis today will touch on what a well-run accounting function looks like, improving back-end financial processes, and financial systems. Alexis, welcome. How are you?
Thanks, Cuddy, for having me.
Of course. Is this unique? You and I do the same thing. We touch different clients who are same part of this practice line. So it's just wonderful. So thanks for making the time. You've worked in both public accounting and in industry. From your perspective, how do those experiences shape the way you advise clients today?
Yeah, it really is such a benefit that I've been on both sides of the table, having that public accounting experience and the in-house private accounting experience. That combination really shapes how I advise clients today. Public accounting gave me a broad viewpoint and broad exposure. I saw a lot of different businesses, different growth stages, different leadership styles, different versions of what good looks like. And it really trained me to spot patterns quickly, where risks tend to show up, what breaks first as companies grow, how investors, lenders, and auditors think about financial information. My in-house experience was equally as important because it grounded me in reality. When you're internal, you're not just designing a process, you're living with it. You feel the pressure of those deadlines and limited staff, system constraints, competing priorities from the rest of the organization. When I was first at Delaware North, I kept giving the CFO all of these recommendations, and I realized nothing was happening. I'd go into his office, I'd tell him these things. He's like, "Oh my gosh, you're right. What great insights." And then I'd go back in the week and nothing had changed. And finally, I'm like, "Oh wait, I'm the one that has to make these things change now. I have to get the people together. I have to make everybody understand why it's important." So today, when I advise clients, I'm always balancing kind of those two perspectives, not only that consultant perspective, but what is it like to sit in those seats and bring people along? And I'm really thinking about the technical accuracy, but also the external expectations, and asking, is this sustainable for the team? And does this actually help leadership make decisions? I don't really believe in, the perfect on paper solutions that fall apart in practice. The goal is progress, clarity, and scalability, not complexity for complexity's sake.
That's a really good point. It is vastly different if you're an in-house accountant as compared to a consultant, because a consultant comes in, you do your job, and you leave. Your in-house accountant, you have to deal with not only the system and processes, but everything else and everybody else. So it takes a special kind of skill, and be able to touch on both areas. It allows you to sort of stand on top of the fray. From a consultant perspective, when you start working with a new client, what are some of the common gaps you see between what leadership expects from the accounting functions and what's actually happening behind the scenes?
Yeah, one of the most common things that we see when starting with any new client across any industry, nonprofit, for-profit, anything, is just the gap between what leadership expects from the accounting function and what's actually happening behind the scenes. Leadership often expects timely strategic insights, things like real-time cash flow visibility, margin analysis, or forward-looking guidance. But when we look under the hood, the accounting team is still spending most of their time on manual reconciliations, fixing data issues, or pulling reports from disconnected systems. A big part of this gap comes from assumptions. There's often an assumption that because financials exist, They must be accurate, timely, and decision ready. But in reality, the team may be doing heroic work just to get the books closed. And this is not a people problem. It's not that those people are, bad or insufficient. It's really usually an infrastructure problem. Systems haven't scaled, processes haven't evolved organically, and responsibilities most often are not clearly defined. And I think when leadership understands what's really happening behind the scenes, it creates a much more productive conversation. So instead of asking, just get this to me faster, the question can become, what do we need to change to get there? What investments do we need to make? And really thinking about the back office and investments in infrastructure, just like you would in a new product you're developing or something new on your client or customer facing side. They're both equally important.
Yeah, it's actually a good segue to my next question as to what are the early warning signs that you see that would sort of say, oh, it's time to rethink system, process, and support models?
Yeah, really growing companies often ask, how do we know when it's time? So this question comes up often. And the answer is usually you feel it before you can name it. So some early warning signs that we see consistently include monthly close taking longer and longer every period. If there is a heavy reliance on spreadsheets and workarounds, and leadership is questioning the numbers instead of just trusting them and using them, these are big, big, big warning signs. Another big one is when the reporting that's coming out of the function is only backward looking. So if finance can tell you what happened last month, but can't explain why or what's likely to happen next, that's a signal that the function needs to evolve. I often say that it's not the growth that caused the problems. It really just exposes them. And as the transaction volume grows, the complexity grows, or locations increase, the cracks that were manageable before become highly visible. And when finance starts to feel like a bottleneck instead of a strategic partner, that's usually the moment to step back and rethink the systems, the processes, and the support models.
Yeah, I have one final question on that same topic. How do you get around people that almost seem to say, this is how it's been done in the past?
Yeah, and we see a lot of that. And it really comes from the top. It's really the one at the top. We've put in, I'll pick on two different clients that we've had. One where the senior accountant was really pushing the CEO to move to our model. She was pushing, she was advocating for it. They find the CEO was kind of hesitant about having an outsourced function, if you will. She was hesitant about the technology changes that were going to come with it. But since her person was saying, let's do it, we go in, we implement the model, and all of a sudden the senior accountant puts the brakes on because she didn't realize the chart of accounts was going to need to change, right? Something as simple as that. She's like, wait a minute, why did you do that to me? So then we had to, kind of back up and start again with bringing her along. Unfortunately, in that case, the CEO wasn't 100% aligned. So I think then it took, 8 months instead of what could have taken 3, and just, I'll say bringing the humans along in the process. Whereas we have a similar client, similar longevity in the position of a senior accountant with a CEO who fully believed in the model, fully believed he was going to get better information from it, fully believed in, candidly, the insurance policy, the outsourced model, and really wanting his senior accountant to work a more normal week and have higher value tasks versus just gathering all the pieces. With that executive support, we brought her along very smoothly, very quickly. Within 3 months, we're humming along with no issues. And I think if you had looked at the two individuals before, again, similar personalities, it really was that executive support that made the biggest difference.
That's a good point. Let's focus a little bit on industry. Where do you most often see clients struggle? From cash flow, visibility, to reporting or system limitations? And how does that impact decision making? And then if you could share a real life example, would be great.
Yeah, so I definitely spend most of my time with restaurants. So I'll probably pick on that a little bit, but I don't think it's only restaurants that have this. I think our practice as a whole for Oasis helps a lot of nonprofit organizations or tax exempt organizations. those organizations that have reimbursable grants or just candidly a lot of complexity across their different programs and funding sources have the same challenges, right? It's how do we get the most accurate information as timely as possible to make decisions and really know what that cash flow will look like. And I would say most often we have to back up and start the building blocks at the bottom. Restaurants, whenever you talk to people about restaurants, they all think they make all this money, right? We when we go and sit and have a meal, it's expensive, but it's expensive because there's a lot of costs involved. They're operationally very complex. They're very margin sensitive. And one of the biggest challenges we see with that and cash flow visibility is just there's a lot of locations, operators are busy, they're not always taking the time to step back and look at the information in a timely viewpoint. So what we say is, if you're monitoring your sales, cost of labor, and cost of goods sold, so your food cost in a daily increment, you are going to have more of an impact. If you don't look at it until well after the month closes, when someone's given you the information, you've now missed probably 45 days of opportunity of making it better. Really, layer that into all the fluctuating food costs, labor costs, the transaction volume. If it rains, that might greatly impact what you expected to happen, right? Or you staff low and all of a sudden the weather's super nice and everyone shows up and now you're worried you're going to have a service problem and, how quickly can you get to everyone? And it's very difficult to pinpoint where performance is slipping without strong systems and strong KPIs in place. We see this as a big challenge when all of the technology is disconnected from each other. So you have your POS system, you have an inventory tool that may be separate, the payroll system may be separate, the accounting system is separate. If they're not talking to each other, that creates significant delays, a lot of manual work and data inconsistencies. We also see where some operators or, some clients, again, this could be in multiple industries, they get so much data from so many different places, they're taking too long to synthesize it. So instead of saying, what are my top 3 value creators and being very disciplined about how they go about gathering it, collecting it, analyzing it, they're not able to shift quick enough, if you will. Same thing, I guess I'll walk this into my real life example is sometimes we walk in and and Cuddy, I'm sure you see this with your clients too. There's high energy, high growth, lots going on, but just kind of spraying all over the place. There's changes that need to be made in almost every aspect of the business to start to streamline and put more discipline to it. Mm-hmm. They tend to be reactive. They're growing. They're more excited about that growth than thinking about just kind of the stability of it behind the scenes. The reporting's always delayed. The unit level performance wasn't clear. There was a lot of time spent reconciling rather than analyzing and just trying to figure out what went where. One of them, the deposit went to the wrong store and just cycling back through to figure out which store it should have gone to took too much time, right? Those kind of things that as accountants, I think we can all relate to, but the leadership may be like, why is the accounting taking so long? And that's why, because if you don't have things streamlined, it's a mess. But what we did is we started to standardize the close process and really tighten the flow of data from the POS and payroll systems into the accounting system so that it had a systematic way of going in. In payroll, we had to make sure the departments were set up right, that the data in the system was set up in such a way that we wanted the accounting system to receive it. And we didn't overhaul everything at once. We focused on consistency, clear ownership, and as few manual touch points as we could, because the reality is what comes into the accounting system comes from operations and comes from an operator that has to follow a process. And if they don't, we end up with bad information to then report on. But over time, the reporting became faster and more reliable. Leadership could see the unit level performance more clearly and really identify trends earlier. And the biggest shift wasn't just the numbers. I think it was better conversation. So instead of asking are these numbers right? This seems off. The leadership then, began to trust it because they also understood all of the inputs that went into making it accurate. And why is this location outperforming? What other levels can we pull next month? What things is this location doing that we can copy? What best practice can we move along? And it really just changed the dynamic. And that's really how we view ourselves, is really finance needs to be a true operational partner. And that's where we see the highest value.
Good points. It's a lot to unpack on that. Actually helps me answer my next set of questions for the system and process optimization. The risk, you mentioned about the risk, not able to make decisions timely because, it takes a while to get the information to owners and almost all the time they're not accurate because things are in different places, a different bucket that they shouldn't be. But when clients modernize their accounting tech stack processes, so what kinds of improvement do they typically notice first, both financially and operational? I think you answered that, but maybe you can extend.
I think when financial systems don't keep pace with the growth, the risks compound, I'll say almost slowly, and errors become harder to detect, particularly when there's a lot of manual processes involved. So as things keep happening and it's happening quickly, if we don't step back and say, all right, should we change the process? Should we change the system? We all of a sudden end up with a lot of manual processes because we're just going to solve it right now. And the institutional knowledge gets trapped inside of a few key people, which candidly often leads to burnout. And then we've got the risk of that person leaving, right? We certainly see, and I'm sure you see this with your clients, we certainly have institutional knowledge trapped in long-term employees that we can't get out. When that risk is retirement. Somehow it's just so important to make sure that we always have that continuous improvement loop built into anything we're doing. And I'll say the clients that we consult with, anyone who's an outsourced accounting client of ours, we do this on a routine basis. So every 3 to 4 months in our routine meetings, we kind of stop and say, okay, what's working? What's not working? What's become a pain point? What should we shift? Because there's always little things, right? There's always, these businesses are always growing and changing. They may have a new customer that can only receive invoices a certain way, or a new vendor that can only receive the invoice a certain way to pay. And we have to make slight adjustments, and we have to continually do that to make sure everybody's on the same page and that we're institutionalizing it within the system in the process and the approvals versus just in someone's head, knowing that has to happen. Because if that person's gone, it won't happen. From a leadership perspective, really delayed or unreliable information just increases the chance of missing the red flags. If there's going to be cash flow pressure or margin erosion or compliance issues, I often say, growth doesn't break the systems. It really just shows that the system is broken. So I think really taking that time to make sure you're having those routine conversations with your teams about what can be better is completely and utterly invaluable. And I think no one ever has the time for it, right? Yeah. But there's that cost of now you're in a stressful situation and scrambling at midnight to get an answer for someone.
Yeah, having those routine conversations is part and actually foremost of what we do, the outsourced accounting team. It just helps for knowledge transfer from my perspective to them. Also allows us to know what's going on and how we can better advise them. We've always said, we are your accounting department. We assume the role of your accounting department. We're embedded into what you do. And you could have an accounting department. Sometimes you don't have an accounting department and we feel in that role. But when you do have an accounting department, we work with the accounting team that's in place. So from your perspective, for organizations that already have an internal accounting team, where do you see the outsourced partners adding the most value?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I'll be honest, we have this conversation all the time because as different prospects come in, we really have to look at what does this business look like? What does this business need? And the reality is we work best in partnership. That's all there is to it. When there is a quarterback at the client and there is our team, we produce the best outcomes when both sides has clearly defined roles and responsibilities. So we've had situations where there was a CFO who was very, very strong and was trying to manage an accountant, right? They could only afford, I'll say, one lower level person, was spending all their time almost coaching that person in how to do accounting. By shifting that to an outsourced model, we know how to do accounting. We were then supporting that CFO in a completely different manner. For the cost of one person, we're a fractional controller, a fractional accounting manager, a fractional senior accountant, fractional AP clerk, right? We're able to bring everything to the table so that that CFO can really focus on the highest level strategy. Same thing. We have organizations that, have a strong accounting person, a strong controller, but when it comes time to reporting up to the executives or to a board, they're asking, I'll say, more sophisticated analysis questions that person isn't necessarily trained how to do, nor candidly might have time in their day. So we're able to layer that on. The internal teams are essential for day-to-day execution and institutional knowledge. You do need someone sitting there that has an extreme amount of value, but having an outsourced partner who can bring the strategic perspective, scalability, specialized expertise without adding permanent headcount is equally as valuable. The internal team might not always be looking at systems or how to improve a framework or really trying to act as a thought partner because they're so wrapped up in the day-to-day. So I really think that's another layer that the outsourced partner brings. When it works well, the internal teams keep the engine running. The outsourced partners help redesign the engine to support the business where it's going next and really work in tandem. And again, both we see as equally as important to the organization. It does help when the internal person, if they were to go on a medical leave or have something that took them away, we can also parachute in and support the business. If you think about, an outsourced partner is an insurance policy, nothing breaks, right? Same thing when we're talking about the processes that we put in. Because we're not sitting there, a lot of our processes are built into this technology. And the reality is Cuddy could do it, Alexis could do it, Kaylin could do it. It doesn't matter who does it because the process is built in to a system that is very easy to follow. There's written instructions, and there's a lot of value in that. We definitely want to complement the existing team and the client's team. We're never really looking to replace them. Again, we just really, really focus on that partnership.
Yeah, it really is optimization. And that's a good point you made about it wouldn't get broke. It's not going to be broken because we provide that business continuity from our perspective. So we have a system and processes in place, highly documented. Someone is on parental leave, somebody's going to step in and do the work. So it just makes for a much more better partnership with us.
Yeah. And definitely just having the perspective. I mean, we have multiple clients, right? We can't drop everything every time a client asks, but the benefit in that is because we have those other clients, we see different things emerging, right? We may see different, especially across industries, there's just definite themes that you start to notice and you bring that perspective to the organization and to that board. And again, I just think that thought partnership is invaluable.
Yeah. And then just the final thought to that, we've had some clients that went all the way to an M&A exit with just a CFO, and we supported him throughout that process. When it makes sense, it's getting it for a fraction of the cost, but get highly qualified folks be in there and help them.
And I think a key differentiator for our service too is just the support of those systems, right? I always say when we're talking with, prospects or even clients, like in my inbox, I'm overwhelmed sometimes with all of the different tools that they're trying to, somebody is trying to get me to buy. And really, that's another key investment we're making as a firm is what's the best technology out there? Are we using it? What's the most sustainable? What's safe from a cyber perspective, right? Are we protecting all the data for these clients? So I think that tends to be the item we don't talk about enough, but we are bringing that, I'll say, IT aspect, technology aspect to our clients and really being that finance system support as well.
Right. Then final thought again is having consistency of having the same people with the same background in certain clients and industry protocol. Itself makes, just makes it easier for us to provide our services and be able to pass on the knowledge to new clients in that area.
Yes, 100%. You don't have to educate our team and how the
Exactly.
business works. I think is
Yeah.
what we often hear is, oh my God, it's such a relief. I didn't have to explain that to your staff person. So that's another phenomenal point, Cuddy.
Very good. Very good. That is all the questions I have. Is there anything else you want to touch on? Any comments you want to make?
I don't think so. This has been an engaging conversation. Thank you.
Of course. Well, I want to thank Alexis Becker again for our time today. We've touched on what a well-run accounting function looks like. What are the things to keep in mind if you want to improve your back-end financial processes and then financial systems. Again, I want to thank Alexis Becker, and I'm your host, Cuddy Thomas. I am part of Withum's outsourced accounting and fractional CFO service line. We support the offices of controllers and CFOs, as Alexis mentioned that many, many times over. So if you'd like to know more what we do and how we support our clients, please go to withum.com/oasis, and that's spelled OASYS. Thank you again.
Thanks for joining us. Be sure to subscribe to our podcast so you'll be first in line to hear what's coming next. Don't want to wait for our next episode? Check us out at withum.com. That's WITHUM.com.